A fighter sits on the deck with both engines turning. The noise is past the point where shouting means anything, and a person in a colored vest walks toward it, carrying a fuel hose, and puts thousands of pounds of jet fuel into an aircraft that never shut down. Everything about that sentence sounds like a mistake. It is not a mistake, and it is not bravado. It is a written procedure with a name, practiced until it is boring, and the reason it exists has nothing to do with courage. It has to do with a clock. Understand the clock, and every strange part of this makes sense. An aircraft on the ground is doing nothing useful. It is a very expensive object occupying space, and the only thing that matters is how fast it can be flying again. That interval has a name in every air operation on Earth. Turnaround, fuel, checks, and back into the air. Everything else is negotiable. That number is not. Now consider what shutting down actually costs. The engines wind down, the aircraft goes cold. Systems that were running have to be brought back up, and a start is not free. It burns fuel, it wears parts, and on some aircraft it triggers checks that must be completed before anyone flies again. Minutes turn into a much larger number. So somebody asked the obvious question. If the engines are the expensive part to stop and start, why stop them? Keep them running. Bring the fuel to the aircraft instead of bringing the aircraft to a cold state. Do the whole thing in the time it takes to fill the tanks and send it back up. That is the entire idea. Everything else you are about to hear is the machinery built around it, so that a reasonable idea does not become a dangerous one. Because fuel and running engines in the same place is exactly the combination a normal person would design a procedure to prevent. Start with the thing you notice first if you ever watch it happen. Everybody's wearing a color. Yellow, green, purple, red, blue, white, brown. Not decoration, not units, not rank. Each color is a job, and the colors exist so that from 30 feet away, in noise that erases speech, you can tell exactly what a person is allowed to do. The fuel crew wears purple. On a carrier deck, they have a nickname everyone knows, and their entire world is one substance moving through hoses. They are not general help. They do not tow. They do not signal aircraft. They do not handle anything else. They handle fuel, and that is the whole assignment, which brings up the sound. Standing near an aircraft at power, hearing protection in, you are not going to have a conversation. Radios help, but a radio is one channel, and this is a scene with a dozen people who each need to know something different at the same moment. Voice does not scale here, so the whole operation runs on hand signals. Arms out, fists closed, a finger drawn across a throat, a thumb turned down. Every signal is standard, taught the same way, and given large enough to read at a distance. It is a language built for a place where nobody can hear anything, and everyone has to agree instantly. And the signals are not suggestions. A hand signal is an instruction, and the person giving it has authority over that specific movement while it is happening. Rank does not override it. The person who can see the wingtip is the person who decides whether the wingtip is clear, and everyone senior to them waits. That single idea is what makes the rest possible. In a scene this loud and this fast, safety cannot depend on somebody working out who is in charge. It has to be decided in advance, by role, and visible on a person's chest. That is what the colors are actually for. Now the part that sounds trivial and is not. Before the fuel nozzle goes anywhere near the aircraft, a wire gets connected. Grounding, bonding. Two words for the same idea, making the aircraft, the hose, and the equipment all electrically the same thing before any fuel moves. Fuel moving through a hose builds static charge. It simply does, the way a carpet does, and the amount is not dramatic. It is just enough. A spark needs a difference in potential between two objects. Remove the difference and you have removed the spark, not reduced it, removed it. The wire is the entire defense, so the sequence is fixed and never improvised. Ground first, then connect, then flow, then stop the flow, disconnect, and only then remove the ground. Anyone who has done it will tell you the order in the same words in the same order, because that order is the procedure, and there is no version where it is rearranged to save a moment. There is a second thing that happens before any of this, out of sight, and it decides more than the hose does. Somebody tests the fuel, not the aircraft, the fuel itself, pulled as a sample, checked for water and for particles before it is allowed anywhere near a tank. Subscribe. Water is the enemy people underestimate. Fuel systems live in a world of pressure and temperature changes, and water and fuel can freeze at altitude, block a filter, or feed corrosion in a tank nobody will open for months. So it is checked on the ground every time, because at altitude, there is nothing anyone can do about it. Particles are the other half. Anything solid in the line is a problem for components machined to tolerances you cannot see. So the fuel passes through filters and separators on its way, and the sample gets looked at by a person in the light deliberately. It is one of those checks that is boring on every single occasion except one. On a ship, all of this sits on top of a fuel system that runs through the hull like a circulatory system. Pumps, tanks, valves, and stations feeding the deck from below. The deck crew are the visible end of it. Most of the system is somewhere the flight crew will never see. Now the connection itself. Modern combat aircraft are not fueled by pouring anything into an opening on top. Fuel goes in under pressure, through a single receptacle, and the aircraft's own system distributes it to the tanks in the right order to keep the aircraft balanced. One connection, one point, one control. That design exists for exactly this situation. One connection means one thing to get wrong, one thing to check, and one thing to remove. Pressure refueling is faster than gravity, and it is closed. The fuel never sees open air on the way in. The engineering removed the problem before the procedure had to manage it. Through all of it, the pilot stays strapped in. That surprises people, and it is deliberate. The aircraft is running. Somebody has to be at the controls, ready to shut it down, and moving a person in and out of a cockpit next to a live fuel line adds motion to a scene that is trying very hard to have as little motion as possible. Everyone else holds position too. Nobody wanders. Nobody crosses behind the aircraft to save a few steps, because behind the aircraft is exhaust that will knock a person down. The footprint of this operation is drawn before it starts, and staying inside it is most of the job. Off to one side, there are people who do nothing at all if it goes correctly. Fire response, standing by, equipment ready, watching. They are not there because anyone expects trouble. They are there because the cost of having them and not needing them is a few people standing in the cold. And the cost of the reverse is not survivable. The aircraft's position is chosen too. Nose pointed so it can move away without turning through anything. Exhaust pointed where nothing and nobody is standing, and enough room that if the whole thing has to end early, it can end by the aircraft simply leaving. The escape route is part of the parking, and any one person there can stop it. Not just the supervisor, not just the senior person. Anyone in the scene who sees something wrong gives the signal and everything halts. No discussion, no ranking of opinions, no penalty for being wrong about it. The system is built assuming a stop is cheap and a mistake is not. That rule is easy to write and hard to keep alive. It only works if stopping something has never cost anyone anything the last 100 times somebody did it. Which means the culture around this procedure is doing as much work as the procedure, and it is maintained on purpose every day by how people react to a false alarm. When the tanks are full, the sequence runs back. Flow stops, line is depressurized. Nozzle comes off. The receptacle gets closed and checked. The panel gets secured, and only then does the grounding wire come off. Last, in the same order every time, because the risk does not end when the fuel stops moving. Then somebody walks the aircraft, around it, looking at it, checking that nothing was left connected and nothing was left lying on the ground. A hose, a cap, a tool, a rag. The walk takes under a minute, and it is the last chance anyone has to catch a small thing before it becomes an airborne thing, which is the same reason a deck full of people walks its own surface, shoulder to shoulder, looking down. Anything loose is a hazard, because engines at intake pressure will take in whatever is near them, and a single bolt in the wrong place ends an engine. So the sweep happens before flight operations, on schedule, by everyone available. On a carrier, all of this happens in a space with no spare room whatsoever. Aircraft parked with wingtips over the water, tow tractors threading between them, in a surface that is simultaneously a runway, a parking lot, a workshop, and a fuel station. The choreography is not a metaphor. It is the actual constraint. And that surface is moving. It rises and falls, it rolls, and it is wet a great deal of the time. A fuel hose on a moving deck behaves differently than a fuel hose on concrete, and the people handling it know exactly how much slack is safe because they have handled it in that weather before. At night, it all happens again with almost no light. Deck lighting is kept low so nobody's night vision is destroyed. Colors are harder to read, and the people doing this are relying on position, on wands, and on knowing the routine well enough to do it without needing to see much. The people doing it are young. That is worth saying plainly, because a visitor watching this always assumes the person with the hose has decades behind them. Often they are a few years out of school. What they have is a qualification that was signed, checked, and has to be renewed. Competence built deliberately rather than accumulated slowly. And every step of it gets written down. Who fueled, how much, which station, which sample, who supervised. Not as bureaucracy for its own sake, but because a system this repetitive can only be checked by comparing what happened to what was supposed to happen. And that comparison needs a record. Which is why the one thing this procedure will never tolerate is somebody finishing quickly. Not going fast. Fast is fine. Fast is the entire point. Skipping is what is forbidden. A step done out of order to save 8 seconds is the failure mode that this whole structure exists to make impossible. So the good version of this looks like nothing. An aircraft lands, taxis to a spot, sits with the engines running while people move around it with practiced economy, and takes off again. No drama, no raised voices, no photograph anyone would keep. That is what a solved problem looks like from outside. And that is the answer to how anyone puts fuel into a jet with the engines running. Not nerve, a color for every roll, a language of hands, a wire connected before anything flows, fuel check before it is trusted, a fixed order that nobody rearranges, and any single person able to stop all of it without explaining themselves. It is the same pattern everywhere on a ship. The more alarming something looks from outside, the more procedure is holding it up from underneath. Next time, something that looks impossible even to the people who do it. How crews land a helicopter on a ship that is pitching underneath them in a storm.